Good afternoon and welcome to Markets Today. I'm your host, Mbithe Mwema. Today is the last trading day of the Nairobi Securities Exchange, being the 18th day of October 2019. A very interesting day following the day that the President sent back the Finance Bill 2019 to the legislature, instructing them rather to repeal the element of the rate cap. So we expect a rate cap repeal. We have seen an upside with regards to the trading in the banking stocks. As of yesterday, equity was the top traded stock, closing up 5% over the day with about 40.97 million shares traded yesterday. Today, it continues to dominate market, and just before we started the show, we had seen 17 million shares traded. Who's trading these stocks? It's foreigners. There's been a large seller in the market, and the demand is actually more or less evenly split between the local and the foreign funds. Today, we're taking a slight trajectory with regards to discussing what's happening in the economy. There has been a lot of conversation with regards to infrastructure spending, an increment to the national debt ceiling to 9 trillion shillings, and whether this is justified or not. Now, the bulk of this lending that we expect for the government to take on is largely related to infrastructure spending. This week, we are looking out for the infrastructure bond that the government has already put out a prospectus on, looking to raise 60 billion for infrastructure. So we want to understand, if the government is in the face of taking on debt to actually expand on infrastructure, how beneficial is this for us? But we take a look backwards and look at the case of Germany and understand, where has Germany come from, being a first world country? What was the impact of infrastructure development in that country? How did they do it? What worked? What did not work? And are there any read-throughs for us in that element? Joining us today is Mr. Thild Becker, who's a transport strategist in Germany. Thilo has been in the country for this week. He was also here in 2011. So he's able to give us an outside-in review or a recap of what he has seen, what is working, and how could we actually learn from the experience in Germany. Welcome to the show, Dr. Becker. Okay, so we were just discussing the element of infrastructure. You are a transport strategist in Germany. Maybe you can briefly give us an overview of what has happened in Germany for the last 50 years, what has worked, what has not worked with regards to infrastructure expenditure.
Back in 1945, after the end of World War II, large parts of Germany were totally destroyed. There was very little infrastructure available, and every new road, every new bus which got into the country really improved the situation of the people.
Okay.
And there was a big process of motorization starting, and especially like in the 60s, 70s, and partly in the 80s, people were really thinking, politicians were thinking, the roads are going to be the big future of the country.
Okay.
So let's build many roads in order to boost the economy.
And then this is also what now sort of came up with the brands of the BMW and other German machines as a consequence.
Of course, like Germany's economy is still highly dependent on the export of cars. Of course, we sell some cars also in the country,
okay,
but those companies are global players nowadays with production sites all over the world, and really trying to export that strategy to other countries as well.
Okay, so you have a scenario where from 1945, Germany has been rebuilding itself, and it chose to focus on transport and build a lot of road infrastructure for roads.
Exactly. Roads were newly built, they were extended, widened, new highways were being built, both on the local scale within the cities, but also on a national scale.
All right, interestingly. And how has the politics of the day actually had any impact on infrastructure? Is it cyclical? Does the current political regime have any say with regards to how much is allocated to infrastructure spending?
Well, back in those 60s, 70s, quite a lot was spent on building up the country, also with external support, not just coming from the country itself. And it really helped to the economy to grow.
All right.
And because when there is no infrastructure available, every new road will create a large socio-economic benefit.
Okay, I like that you're bringing out the element that infrastructure did help the economy to grow. Is there a direct correlation? I mean, what did it mean, their roads, so what?
Back in those decades, there was certainly a correlation. However, time has gone on, And right now we are in Germany still in the process of continuing those new roads.
Okay.
And you really, and at our point right now, we really have to question ourselves in Germany, is a new road actually bringing any benefit to the society as a whole? Or are there already so many roads that more is not making it better?
All right.
It's just like having breakfast. Having the first egg for breakfast is great. You are highly motivated to eat that egg. And then you are also motivated to eat the second or the third egg. But eventually, with 10 eggs, you are really there. You have the marginal benefits, the thinking marginal benefits, and there is no positive outcome. In fact, it may actually make trouble to your body.
All right. So the utility diminishes as you go.
Yes.
I mean, as you go on spending and spending and spending.
Right.
Okay. Maybe another final question. If we're still looking at the case of Germany, so was the infrastructure funded by debt by the government, or was there equity, or was there a surplus in government operations that was able to largely finance the infrastructure in this country?
Nowadays we have on the national level 70-80% debt of the gross domestic product.
That's a high level. Does that concern you as a citizen of the country?
Definitely, because that's a payload for future generations. Me and my children, grandchildren are going to have to pay for that. And so then you really have to ask yourself, are those new investments actually creating a benefit for the future generations? Especially when you consider global trends like climate change. Like there's certainly some drastic changes in the future.
All right, that's interesting when you say that the debt to GDP ratio in Germany is about 70 to 80%. So in Kenya, it has always been, the target was 50%. I think we'd gotten slightly above that by the time we changed our rules. And there's always the public outcry saying that this is too much and we cannot handle it. So it's fascinating to see that a first world country has more or less a similar problem. But then let me ask that, how does the country still continue to prosper? Because the GDP per capita, the employment opportunities, the opportunities to actually run a successful business and thrive in Germany are considerably higher than other places. How does the government, in your view, balance the two? You have a lot of GDP, but then there's still economic growth at the ground.
I think nowadays it's not related to transport infrastructure at all, but more to other parts of society, also governmental spendings. Education is certainly an essential thing. Getting more students to university, also getting practical workers well trained. That are all the factors which boost the economy nowadays.
All right. So in a way, you're saying that over and above the infrastructure, the government was also very deliberate in creating sectors or manufacturing sectors in a way that were able to leverage on the infrastructure spend. So what are the dominant sectors today of industry in Germany?
It's certainly the machine industry, including cars. Then also banking, some technology firms. We do not have a global player like Google or Facebook. However, there's a lot developed in small companies. We do not have those huge players on a worldwide scale, but just a firm of 1,000, 5,000 employees, maybe even located somewhere in the countryside, but still very attractive for the whole economy, and getting a stable structure even during economic crisis.
Okay, so that's interesting. I think in some what you're saying is there's an opportunity, or rather there's a benefit for having infrastructure going over and above, rather going beyond the capital towns of economic activity, and as long as it goes to other areas, then people can be able to tap into economic activity that develops them and develops the country as a whole.
Absolutely, but as I said, having more and more infrastructure nowadays is really getting us to a point where there is not necessary anymore. And we really have to work on the change within the people's mind. Many people are still thinking more infrastructure creates a better economic situation.
But
They
it does
ask
not
for more.
necessarily.
And in fact, there are roads which have been built 15 years ago, but nowadays those forecasts made back then, how many cars will be on the road?
Oh, there are no cars on some of these roads.
Only half of the forecasts or even less.
Okay.
So there is not even the demand there anymore to actually increase the motorization.
So that's already more or less a sunk cost that you have to deal with, or your future generations have to deal with when you're talking about debt.
Exactly, and that's why there is, especially with the climate change issue right now, a big discussion going on within the whole society, how to change the behavior of the people, how to change their way of moving around in the cities, in the countryside, just to motivate them to use more public transport, cycling.
Okay.
About 15% of all the trips are done by bicycle,
Okay,
and
interesting.
also a large share, of course, by walking.
All right.
And cycling, for example, is done by all groups of society.
Oh, you actually cycled here, right?
Yes, I also did
And you
some
felt
cy-
safe
I
cycling
felt
here.
relatively safe here in Kenya.
Relatively
However,
safe.
in Germany, I feel somewhat safer.
Somewhat safer,
That's very important, because we also want children, elderly people to use the bicycle, and it's
Oh, you
being
pay
used.
people to use the bicycle.
Members of parliament use the bicycle, the mayors are using them.
Maybe we should challenge our own legislation to actually use bicycles, and we could actually save on some of this cost.
The windshield perspective of politicians is certainly still a problem in Germany, but we are getting better
You're
on
getting
it.
better. Okay, interesting. So, Dr. Becker, the last time you were here was 2010, 2011. First forward, you come back in the year 2019. What are your views? What has changed? What has stood out for you with regards to infrastructure?
Back then, I did research on different modes of transport, especially the environmentally friendly modes, public transport, cycling and walking. And when I really compare the differences, also when I look at the statistics, the number of vehicles roughly doubled in the country,
Okay.
which is a lot in such a short period of time.
Does that tell you, I mean, would that be a symbol of improved economic status for the country if the cars have doubled?
Is it a real improvement if people are stuck in traffic and just turning roads into large
that's a
party
fair
lots?
observation.
So that's really a discussion which has to go on, also in terms of who is using the vehicles. Because here in Kenya, many people completely rely on walking. They walk from the slum areas, the informal settlements, to industrial areas for an hour or even longer.
Okay.
And that is a large percentage of the population, and only a small part, like 10-15%, actually benefits from the new roads being
10-15% benefit from the new roads.
because not more people are using the car in, for example, Nairobi,
Okay.
based on travel survey data.
Okay,
And
that's
that is
a bit depressing, because if you're saying, based on your studies, the benefit of any infrastructure spend, especially roads, is only 10-15% of the population benefit, but yet the entire population has to carry the debt burden, then why do governments actually go ahead and keep building some of these roads and infrastructure projects?
Well, in Germany we call that windshield planning perspective.
Windshield planning perspective.
Decision makers sit in a car, they have that perspective onto what's going on around them in the city, and of course then they push forward those roads investments.
So it's pushing for votes, so it's a thing that happens everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much. It's typical for other developing countries as well. What really surprised me, however, was between 2011 and this year that there are nowadays more bicycles on the road. And it's not just like black mambas being in operation
So they're
in
getting
Nairobi
slightly
or in
better.
the countryside. No, it's also like middle and upper class which use those bicycles as a sporting tool, sporting equipment.
Okay.
And that's, in my opinion, a great start to also use them for daily traffic. Because to be honest, I also cycled around a little bit here in Nairobi. By bicycle, you are pretty much as fast as by the boda bodas, the motorcycles.
Yes.
because you can just drive along the congestion, the traffic jams. However, of course, sometimes the infrastructure is lacking.
Okay.
There are a few bike paths which have been built, which are really nice,
But they
separated from the car traffic, partly used by motorcycles as well.
Okay.
But that is a really good starting point,
It's a good starting point. Okay,
to
so
build on further investments.
all right. So it's interesting. So you're saying when you came here in 2011, there were no. I mean, the number of cars has more or less doubled, and that's a bit too much, and not necessarily a sign of economic improvement. I'll ask it very differently. Today, you're saying that Germany has gone through about 60, 70 years of aggressive infrastructure spend, and it's now beginning to slow down, and there are no longer benefits today compared to about 50 years ago. So for Kenya, if the roads have been built and already the capacity is over 100% with regards to utilization, wouldn't we then argue and say that maybe we are not even a third, I mean, we're not even 30% in terms of creating infrastructure that is appropriate and enough to cater for the demand in the local economy?
I fully agree. Kenya has about, Germany has about 40 times more cars per inhabitant than Kenya. So there is a real pressure on the whole transportation system. But we really got to the conclusions, okay, more roads do not really help. We can widen them, like in Los Angeles, starting from 2 lanes to 4 lanes.
Okay.
Now they are up to 10 lanes,
Yes.
and they are still congested.
All right.
Because there is such a devil cycle, really, with also urban planning aspects, new infrastructure like schools, workplaces being built, extending the length of the trips.
Okay, so what you're saying, sorry, I mean to cut you short, is there's a lot that can be done. So in other words, from your own evaluation of the case of Germany, we still have a lot to do, but we could be slightly better in how we do it.
Of course, all non-motorized transport plus public transport is a lot more efficient from the perspective of the whole society.
Okay.
It enables more people to reach their destination, and it's really about also the quality of living. Do you want to be stuck in traffic
Or
for
do you want
1
to be
or 2
somewhere else,
hours
do
every Friday
something?
evening, like right now?
Fair enough. That's a good point. So there's a lot of wastage based on how we are executing on some of our infrastructure projects. They are necessary, but we could do it better.
Just think also about air pollution. When landing here on the airport, going into town, sorry, the air is not good. It's a terrible quality. You can smell it. It reduces, it's proven that it reduces the average age people will get. People get sick from
too
air
many
pollution.
cars, too much pollution. All right, let's take a quick break. We're taking a quick break to look at the daily commodity prices. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, now that we have a bit of history with regards to how Germany has gotten to where it is, interestingly, they already have a 70% debt to GDP ratio. So that really doesn't begins to get us away from being scared and actually asking better questions with regards to what can we do with when we're looking at our infrastructure spending. What does this mean for the macro variables looking forward? And as always, should you be putting money in fixed income such as infrastructure projects or equities? We take a short break and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.